So, folks, we're extremely excited because today we have the man, the myth, the legend, the James Dean of the gas hydrate world, Professor Dendy Sloan from the Colorado School of Mines. It's an absolute honor for us to have him here with us today. Um, Professor Sloan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and have a chat with us. We are delighted to have you at ICGH10 and even more delighted that you've agreed to a one-on-one discussion with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. You know, it's a little embarrassed to be called the James Dean of Hydrates. My friend at Exxon called me the Mick Jagger of Hydrates. And when I looked at Albert Brooks, who writes a column on happiness for the Atlantic, he said he saw his daughter watching YouTube and she was laughing. And he asked her what she was laughing at. And she said, "I'm laughing at an old man singing a song, dancing around like a chicken." And when Albert Brooks looked at him, it was Mick Jagger singing, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." But I'm happy to be with you. It's a pleasure to talk with you about this conference that's so very well organized. Everything is to the minute. Everything is done properly.
Thank you so much. The only reason I call you James Dean is when you think of the longevity and the impact of the work. It stays on for generations.
I sold my Porsche before I had a wreck like James Dean did.
Okay, so Prof. Sloan, could you please take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners and to our readers?
Sure. Hello, my name is Dendy Sloan. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm the University Professor Emeritus at the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. I came back to academia after building plants for DuPont, like Professor Karimi worked for DuPont when he was in the United States, and came back to do graduate school and postdoctoral study after DuPont when he did that before DuPont. I've been professing in Colorado since the end of 1975 or so. So it's a pleasure to be with you and to see all the excitement of the young people here.
So, Professor, how are you enjoying your trip to Singapore, sir, and what are your thoughts on how ICGH10 is progressing?
Well, this is my third trip to Singapore. I've come about every 10 years or so, and it's educational. This trip has been much more educational than the previous trip. The first trip, I just stayed at an airport hotel on my way to Mumbai. So it's nice to be here a little bit longer and get to know friends. The ICGH is progressing just amazingly. I'm just surprised at what happened. You know, we only had 200 people at the conference in 1993 when we started at the New York Academy of Sciences. And with pandemic, with COVID, I thought we would not have anybody in 2020, but Professor Linga has wisely decided that we should delay the conference of 2023. And now we have 524 abstracts and a lot of exciting young people here.
That's perfect. And so it's gas hydrates are an evolving field today, but still a little niche. I can only imagine what it must have been when you would have gotten into the field. So could you tell us, how did you come in contact, or how did you get to know about gas hydrates, and what was your first point of contact with the field?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Gaurav. After getting my doctoral degree in adsorbed studies, I did postdoctoral study with Professor Kobayashi at Rice University. At the time, he was looking at bringing down a gas pipeline from Alaska to the lower 48 states, and they were worried about hydrating up that pipeline. They were worried about water content of the pipeline. But since hydrates are an absorbed species, it was a natural carryover from my doctoral species to study hydrates. And it was a great pleasure to work with him. He insisted that I work very hard. He bought me a bid as my first experimental apparatus. He said, "You sleep here in the laboratory."
That is fascinating. So, Professor, what would you say is the main focus of your work on gas hydrates? How do you think your work has evolved over the years?
Well, the most important thing about the work is the students. The students are the most enthusiastic thing, and I'm really grateful to have I've had a wonderful set of students, and I continue to associate with them. And luckily they've forgotten all the bad things that happened to them during graduate work, and they only remember the wonderful time of their youth when they had almost no money,
Right.
but lots of fun.
Right. And I can relate to that. And I think,
So I can say that we started off in looking at time independent studies and recognizing that nobody measured the hydrate phase. And so we tried to think about using things like Raman spectroscopy with now Professor Soom, and NMR generated from the National Research Council in Canada, and X-ray diffraction to measure the hydrate phase. And the reason they didn't measure the hydrate phase is the Van der Waals grandnephew, the very famous Van der Waals grandnephew, J.H. Van der Waals, had such a wonderful statistical thermodynamics model of hydrates that nobody bothered to measure the hydrates.
right.
They all thought about predicting the hydrates, and that can lead to severe difficulty sometimes.
So, Prof. Sloan, how would you say the field of gas hydrates itself has evolved over the last 20 to 30 years, or at least over the time period that you have been involved in gas hydrate research?
Thank you. It's been kind. Hydrates were discovered almost 100 years ago in pipelines, which really increased the interest in hydrates around 1932. And from 1932 to 1963, the time that J.H. Van der Waals established his statistical mechanics model, people were interested in predictions and trying to avoid hydrates, predicting when hydrates would form and trying to avoid them. And since that time, since 63 to 90, they were interested in looking at the thermodynamics to not only avoid, but think about predicting new hydrate inhibitors like kinetic inhibitors and anti-agglomerates in pipelines. And since 93, they were looking at allowing hydrates to form occasionally, but just seeing if they could avoid the plugs that they would have in flow assurance. But in 1993, when we started this series of conferences in New York Academy of Sciences, we only knew a little bit about energy, which has taken over the conference. It looks like the gas that the Chinese are doing in the Xinhu area of the North and South China Sea, and the gas that the Japanese are doing in long-term tests in Alaska in preparation for the Nankai Trough test are really taking over the field. I would say the flow assurance, which is where we started with after fundamentals, has shrunken to a smaller part of the hydrates now.
That's pretty interesting how the evolution has taken place. And that brings us to ICGH and its history. So the first ICGH, as you mentioned, was held in USA. Do you recollect anything about how ICGH came into being? Do you have any stories to share from that time?
I do have some stories that I have not written down because they're a little bit unusual, I think. It was in a beautiful place in New York, in New Paltz, that John Happel, who was one of the New York Academy of Sciences people, suggested that we hold a conference after the first publication of Clathrate Hydrates of natural gas. At that conference, we were glad to have J.H. Van der Waals, who just passed away this year with us. J.H. Van der Waals was such an enthusiastic, energetic individual. He died at 96 this year, and he was still riding his bicycle to the University in Eindhoven every day, and every summer he would sail with his wife from the Netherlands to Norway. Can you imagine doing that at 96 years old? Wouldn't you like to do that? I would. When we were walking around the lake with a group of people in 1996, he saw such a beautiful lake, he immediately ripped off all of his clothes and jumped into the lake. Such an enthusiastic person. And uninhibited, I should say. Creative.
It's fantastic. And that gives us a perfect segue into one of the landmark milestones, one of the landmark moments in gas hydrate research so far, which is, we all know you are incredibly well known for writing the book that has been described by many researchers across generations as the Bible of the gas hydrate field.
It's very kind of you to say that, Gaurav. And of course, when you write a book, particularly a technical book, you try to write truth, not fiction. Sometimes you can't avoid fiction due to ignorance. But the provost of the university said to me, it's a sort of interesting topic. why don't you think about writing a book, he said. That was back in 1988. And he said, it won't make you rich, but it'll make your life much more interesting, which has certainly happened. And of course, Professor McCogan's book, Professor Uri McCogan, who later sent his son to work with us in doing his doctorate in hydrates, was instrumental in writing the very first hydrate book that I know about. But there were some folks in Hungary who wrote books too, in Miskolc, in Technical University of Hungary, that I visited the first time. I don't speak any Hungarian, of course, so it was a little interesting trip. But it was a fascinating time to write the book. I didn't want to do anything else. I was just so all consumed by hydrates and by writing the book. I didn't want to do anything else. It's fascinating to be in that area of flow when you lose a sense of ego and you lose a sense of time. Like Maria says, it's 8 o'clock when you go in and you look up again and it's 12 o'clock at night. And you say, what happened to the day?
And for our listeners, the book that we're talking about is Clathrate Hydrates of Natural Gases. I believe it started out as Clathrate Hydrates of Natural Gas.
Probably so.
And then became gases.
Probably so. That's right.
So anybody who wants to do anything with gas hydrate research, please get your hands on a copy of this book, and it'll all you need to get started. That's all. Yeah.
It's kind of you to say that, Gaurav. Thank you very much. I say it's a cure for insomnia. When you have trouble going to sleep at night, pick up the book, and in 5 minutes you can go to sleep.
Right. And may I just ask you, how long did it take for you to complete writing the book?
When I started writing that book, I was in a system of flow, so I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to sleep. I didn't want to eat or any of the activities of natural life. It's just a fascinating thing to be in that situation. But after a year and a half, I collected a lot of papers for the first year, and the actual writing took about a year and a half.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's something you'll often see scientists do when they are extremely occupied with a particular problem, isn't it?
Csikszentmihalyi calls that being in a state of flow, where you lose a sense of time, you lose a sense of ego, you lose a sense of everything else in life except being barely able to keep up with what you're doing then.
One of your co-authors on latter editions of the book is Professor Carolyn Koh. And we at the Gas Hydrate community is well aware of the long-standing partnership between Professor Sloan and Professor Koh. So could you please tell us something about Prof. Koh and the partnership that you have with her?
She's a wonderful person. And of course, she's not here because of family illness. Otherwise, she wouldn't miss this conference. But a physics professor once told me about Professor Koh. She's the best example of a human being I've ever met.
Right.
What an unusual thing for a physics professor who is typically very skeptical to say about another human being. I was living in University of Cambridge in 2001 when I got a call from Professor Koh at King's College in London, and she said to me, "I've got to come to Colorado." And I didn't know the driving force of that, but the driving force was the very best reason, the fact of love. She had to come to Colorado to be with her husband, who had started a new biochemical startup in Boulder, Colorado. So it was good that she could come to Colorado as a research professor, but after she arrived in only 2 months, we realized that she could be much more than a research professor, and so we converted it over to a tenure professorship.
Right. That's a fascinating story. And so, Prof. Sloan, as you said, the field of gas hydrates has evolved into a lot more than flow assurance or even recovery of natural gas from hydrate deposits.
Certainly so.
So, could you give us your impassioned view? Where do you anticipate the next breakthrough in gas hydrates research will occur? And what do you believe this breakthrough might entail?
Well, I think when you think about hydrates, particularly in hydrates in a broader region for young people, you kind of have to follow the money. And the money now, it seems like to me, it's coming from the Chinese, particularly in the North China Sea and looking at energy development. There's certainly nice things like CO2 sequestration and even CO2 stopping exchange for methane hydrants in hydrate reservoirs, but I don't think that will ever go beyond much like an academic possibility. But it's clear that the money is in thinking about energy, and it's clear if you plot on the ordinate a plot of the gross national product of the country versus on the abscissa, a course of expended energy, there's a straight line that almost all the countries in the world fall on. So what that implies with a positive slope, what that implies is that the more energy expended by the country, the higher the gross national product will be. And I know we wish it wasn't that way. We know it wish we could conserve energy to go to electricity and go to carbon capture and that sort of thing. But I think for the foreseeable future, perhaps for your career, but certainly for my career, it will be looking at energy from hydrocarbons.
Right. And we definitely hope we can get there sooner rather than later.
We do. We do.
So I want to take the conversation a little left field from just hydrates, and then we'll bring it back.
Okay.
So we know that the world is undergoing a global energy transition.
It is.
Isn't it? So the targets are quite steep. Countries want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So do you think these targets are achievable in our lifetimes at least?
I would certainly hope so, but I think they may be a little ambitious.
Right.
I think certainly even for the first world countries, it may be ambitious, but certainly for third world countries, places like Africa, for example. We know in Africa, the rule of law is the major thing that prevents sub-Saharan Africa from developing. We know that Kofi Annan says that you have to establish the rule of law first, but those people are always interested in personal gain. And with personal gain, there will always be competition and using the easiest resource. In this case, it's hydrocarbon. So I think it will be difficult to get to those to get those goals.
Thank you for that impassioned answer. And how do you think gas hydrates can contribute to the global energy transition?
Well, we know that methane is one of the lowest CO2 generators in hydrocarbons because it goes directly as oxidation to methane to CO2. So, and when we look at hydrates in the deep oceans, we see hydrates being mostly composed of biogenic methane with occasional relapses to some thermogenic methane, perhaps in the northern Shinhu area.
So, Prof. Sloan, we are doing a lot of work on gas hydrate-based technological applications. So we're looking at methane storage and transport. We're looking at CO2 capture, desalination, and a lot of different technologies, right? However, what we are still lacking is the commercialization of these technologies. So what do you think the outlook is for such applications, and how do we expedite the commercialization of such applications?
I think it's wonderful for young people like you. And when we look at people like Dr. Tim Collette, whom I understand you interviewed this morning, or Dr. George Emeritus, you can see from those senior people in the field that it's not a matter of having a job. It's not even a matter of having a profession. It's a matter of having a calling that they're called to, that they devote their life to. And so if you said to George Emeritus, if we stopped paying you tomorrow, would you do what you do? Or if we said to Tim Collette, who's 64 years old, you know, what would you do if they stopped paying you tomorrow? I have confidence that for a long time, until he's no longer physically able, he will continue to follow hydrates.
Yeah, and it's absolutely a case in your point is that Dr. Tim Collette is just going for a new expedition this August to Alaska, which basically is justifying your point and supporting.
Thank you. I appreciate that justification. You know, I don't think he's missed any hydrate expedition that I can think of, except maybe a few in China when he wasn't invited.
Right. So given now this is a question that bugs me a lot, right? And we saw this question even crop up in one of the keynote talks in this conference, which is given how we are progressing towards renewables and given how a lot of countries and companies are not willing to touch new hydrocarbon or fossil fuel sources with a 12-inch pole. what do you think justifies the continued pursuit of recovery of methane from natural gas hydrate deposits?
I think we'll be driven by forces out of our control. I think the second and third world nations will always use hydrocarbons, and they'll probably force the first world nations to compete with hydrocarbons. When we hear about large oil companies converting offshore platforms into wind platforms and things like that, you think, gosh, there are an awful lot of challenges associated with that. So I'm not sure. I think it's a noble goal to come to, but I think we'll probably have to raise the economic level of the third world countries and the second world countries higher before we get to that goal.
Right. Yeah. It's profound insight on that. So ICGH10 has about 550 attendees, and a lot of them are young people. But we want to see ICGH further editions go to 1,000 and 1,500 and 2,000 people, and we want most of those people to be young people attending the conference, right? So, how do we get more young researchers interested in the field of gas hydrates?
Well, things don't always develop the way we wish they would. I mean, we would think if we say it may take 6 years for the Xinhu area to be developed more. If you're 18 years old, 6 years is 1/3 of a life. But if you're 60 years old, 6 years is 10% of a life. So time has a way of telescoping. I don't think things always happen as rapidly as we wish they would. But I think conferences like ICGH10 is a wonderful way of encouraging people to come into there. When people look at you, Gaurav, or your colleagues, the people who are making this film, for example, I think they look to them and say, this is what is possible to be.
Flattery suits us.
It's true. It's true. I think that's true.
So, again, and this is very interesting, and we see that you have added arrows to your quiver, and your research has expanded into the field of cognitive neuroscience and epistemology. So, could you please tell us what this research entails, how you got into it, and just a little bit more about what you're doing now?
At the School of Mines, it's an unusual idea to be involved in neuroscience, and in particular neuroscience and memory and learning. So when I gave the laboratory to Professor Koh, I took the bus up to a nearby university, about 20 miles, which is only a little way, but 20 miles a day for 6 or 7 years to study neuroscience. At the time, the psychology department was morphing into a neuroscience department. We know when we think about distribution functions, do you get the same result for every experiment? The physicists say you should. It's a Dirac function. The engineer says you should approximately. The biochemist says semi-approximately.
Right.
And the psychologist says, sometimes you get the same result. So with biochemistry and with neuroscience, things are morphing toward a more reproducible, narrower distribution function than they had before. And so a retired neurosurgeon and the head of the genetics department at the University of Barcelona is coming over every year to help me teach a course to graduate students about how we establish memory. For example, we know that Alzheimer's is an incurable problem that we know so far, and maybe we're going to make advances over the next, perhaps in your lifetime, maybe not in my lifetime, of doing that. But it's a fascinating area to work in, to think about how does the brain work?
Right.
One of the last unexplored areas, I think.
Works in such a complex and ordered manner, but we don't know how it works.
That's right. That's right. And of course, we know that the human brain, the human cortex, contains around 8 billion neurons, which is almost 3 times as many as our nearest relative, the chimpanzee or the baboon. And so you ask, how is it possible for 2 million years ago for the human brain to develop 3 times the number of neurons? Fascinating question. Turns out to have a simple answer. We learned how to cook that no other animal can do, which caused our brain to grow like crazy.
But wasn't there a doubling of the size of the human brain some 70,000 years ago or something.
Longer than that.
Longer than
Longer than that. I think it was probably around 8 million years ago that the human brain size deviated from that of the primates.
Right. And is that the time the human ancestry line also deviated from chimps?
Yes.
And so our last common ancestor was 8 billion years ago or something.
Yeah, you would. It seemed like a long time, but after maybe 70 years, to a young person like you, things seem like not so long.
I mean, we are all young if you look at those time scales.
Yes, that's right. On geologic time scales, we're all young.
That was a fascinating piece of information that you shared with us. We wish you all the best in your new avenue of research. I hope you go long and far with this particular field as well.
Thank you. It's very kind. You know, I think as you think about your career, it's really important to find something that you enjoy, that you really can do well. And if you enjoy things and you do well, you're bound to excel at it. And if you're bound to excel at it, you'll never go to work. You'll always have fun when you wake up in the morning and think, oh boy, this is today I get to do this. I get to explore this hard question that very few other people in the world will have a chance to look at.
Right. And I hope I get to do something like this someday, because I am extremely interested in paleoanthropology. So that's something I wish I can also pursue.
Well, you know,
someday in the future.
I'm sure things will work out that way for you, Gaurav. You know, you'll a person like you, full of energy and intelligence, can do pretty much what he wants to in life, and the world will make a pathway for you.
Thank you so much for saying that. And Prof. Sloan, so we've almost come to the end of our discussion. Before we leave, any departing thoughts you have for our listeners, or any pearls of wisdom for young and upcoming gas hydrate researchers?
I hope that the young people who see this video will think about doing what they enjoy and finding an enjoyment in life. And life is just too short not to do what you enjoy. You can look at the people around you, look at people like Professor Linga and Professor Karimi, and say, look at Professor Karimi, who used to teach at Northwestern University, who used to work for DuPont, who used to be in the United States and returned to Singapore, who came from the IT system in India. What an admirable person who's tried a number of things in life and clearly enjoys what he's doing. That's my wish for the people who watch this video, to find things you'll enjoy, because when you like what you do, you never go to work.
Perfect. And with that, we've come to the end of this absolutely enlightening session with Professor Sloan. Professor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for arranging this. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you so much for doing this. The people who are taking the video, and for your readers, I hope you enjoy the rest of ICGH10 and have progress in your hydrate work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.